The main ideas of the sermon I'll be giving today have been swirling around in my head for months, probably mostly stemming from my move to Sydney almost a year ago. However, I have decided to deliver it today for several reasons. For one, I just spent 9 months in a country quite similar to our own. In many respects, I feel quite at home there, but there are also many things that Australians do differently that made me examine what we do here. For example, only 10% of my university's 50,000 students live on campus. When I envisioned my university experience, I saw the picture-perfect dorm life, complete with a crazy roommate. I ended up living in a tiny dorm without a roommate. Most of my friends lived at home. There are pros and cons for both ways of doing it, but my question is, why didn't I consider a different path earlier on? There were many benefits to going to such a large university. Some of the students were fresh out of high school. Some of them were fresh out of a gap year. Others were fresh out of a 30-year career. They came from around the world, and each one of them had their own peculiarities. I spent a fair amount of time at the university's queer space with people with a wide variety of orientations and genders. And in fact, I came out to myself and to my Facebook friends this year. So that was another spur for the sermon on authenticity. I asked myself, how do I want to live? How do I want to relate to other people? How do I want to present myself to the world? Or to put that a different way, do I ever want to wear another pair of high heels? All of that combined with my gender studies and philosophy classes to give me a wealth of questions and ideas about the myriad of ways there are to live a life. However, perhaps one of the first seeds that got me started on this path was a Tumblr post. The Tumblr post said that having someone's mailing address is incredible because you could just send that person a picture of a clam. But I can say with almost perfect certainty that no one I know has sent anyone a picture of a clam. So why don't we do things like that? Why don't we skip down the sidewalk instead of walking? Why don't we buy flowers for our friends just because? Why don't we eat dessert first? A few years ago, the youth group's backwards service had the pulpit at the other end of the church, and they started with the closing words in the sermon, and then it ended up with joys and sorrows. And it was really serendipitous that today the chairs were arranged in a circle. There are often good reasons why things are the way they are, of course. You know, I'm giving this sermon in English instead of French. I'm facing forward instead of backward. There are good reasons for those things. But for a lot of things, there's no good reason other than social mandate that things are the way they are. You know, there's no good reason why I can't give the sermon sitting down or wear my shirt inside out. Or, for that matter, date 2 people instead of 1, or take a 2-year gap year instead of a 1-year gap year. The thing is, even when we do things that are outside of the mainstream, there tends to be an accepted way to do them. I mentioned the gap year. There's sort of the way to do it. You know, you have to travel or work or both. It's still really strange to me that after I put my coming out post on Facebook, in which I used the vaguest terms possible, one of my friends messaged me asking if that meant what she thought it meant. And I wanted to say that there are potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of different identities out there. So what, of course, did she mean? But I had a pretty good idea what she meant. Why is it that it can be difficult to think of different ways to live our lives? Even in constructing the examples I used here, I didn't come up with anything new. In saying that I could give the sermon sitting down, I was inspired by a book character who did her dishes sitting down. I don't know if this is scientifically accurate, but I've heard that our brains can't manufacture entirely new faces to put in our dreams. Mostly the background characters have composite faces, or they have the faces of strangers we walk by. Similarly, when I think about my future, I take bits and pieces from people I know who skipped the white picket fence route. Apparently, it's difficult for us to create new paths for our lives because of the discourse surrounding every aspect of our lives. I learned about Foucault's concept of discourse in my gender studies class. It's sort of the all-encompassing set of everything that is ever said about a topic, like children or education or race. Of course, it contains contradictory statements and statements that only a few people agree with, but it is the set of everything that has been said or written. It's extremely hard to think of anything outside of that discourse, because that's what we have experience with and what we have words for. Words are inextricably tied to the concepts they discuss, and the concepts are tied to the words used to describe them. A sentence like, "Robots love and care for humans," is nonsensical outside of the world of sci-fi movies, because right now, robot means a fancy computer that cannot care for anything. In the discourse of sci-fi, of course, it makes total sense. Without the words to describe something, it can be really difficult to talk about it or even recognize it as a possibility or concept. Douglas Adams, the author of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy trilogy, co-wrote a book called The Meaning of Life, in which he gave names to common conundrums, experiences, and sensations. Here are a few of my favorites. BAMF, adjective. Pertaining to or descriptive of that kind of facial expression which is impossible to achieve except when having your passport picture taken. Debt chant, noun. That part of a hymn, usually a few notes at the end of a verse, where the tune goes so high or low that you suddenly have to change octaves to accommodate it. Dibble, verb. To try to remove a sticky something from one hand with the other, thus causing it to get stuck to the other hand and eventually to anything else you try to remove it with. And finally, Hambledon, noun. The sound of a single-engined aircraft flying by, heard whilst lying in a summer field in England, which somehow concentrates the silence and sense of space and timelessness and leaves one with a profound feeling of something or other. Before he described and named each of these concepts, I didn't really think of them as distinct experiences, but after reading each entry, the light bulb went off. Of course, we've all felt those things. I haven't been to England, but, I've heard crop dusters on the Palouse. That's the same thing. So that's the sort of thing that discourse can do to us, blinding us to realities in our lives. Luckily, it's not entirely impossible to escape, or at least you can escape the mainstream from the margins. Foucault, himself a gay man, felt that being gay was less about one's desires and more about the opportunity to create new relationships from the ground up, based on what one truly desires. According to him, queer individuals' slantwise place in society helps us examine what is and helps us invent what should be. He said, "It's up to us to advance into a homosexual thesis that would make us work on ourselves and invent, I do not say discover, a manner of being that is still improbable." It seems that he advocated a continuous discovering of self and possibilities for a community without ever laying out a program of proposals, since it would then become a law, and then we'd be right back at the start. He wrote that our work should be to carefully examine what has been, what is intelligible but not necessary. Even though he only wrote about gay men, lesbians, and sadomasochism, his ideas are applicable to everyone in the queer community. Recently, especially the asexual community has been instrumental in coming up with new relationships, like the queer platonic relationship. It's different for every couple, but generally it's a blurring of the lines between a traditional friendship and a dating relationship. They often redefine what it means to be romantic without a certain level of physical intimacy. Of course, this sort of examination of everyday traditions is valuable for everyone. I would argue that many of us as UUs have a slantwise place in society, since to many people, the idea of a church that does not require belief in a higher power is contradictory. We dare to create our own spirituality all the time. I dare say that many of us follow a different path in other aspects of our lives too. The jobs we take, the causes we fight for, the way we dress, the way we raise our kids. The benefits of examining what we do and living authentically are enormous, both for us and for our communities. On the level of day-to-day behavior, it could improve our moods immensely to feel free to wear tutus or cartwheel across the lawn. On the level of shaping our lives, doing things like traveling nonstop in a caravan or going back to university later in life can help us find our true passion and really enjoy our life. Of course, creating our own path can help us in our search for truth and meaning. This year in religious studies, I learned about a myriad of different religions and cults, and it seems that spirituality is such a deeply personal thing that just about everyone would benefit from piecing together their own beliefs and practice. Interrogating our choices can also help us with our relationships with others. I recently learned about a philosophy of relationships called relationship anarchy. One definition of relationship anarchy is as follows. It is a lifestyle, a way of doing personal relationships. Relationship anarchy is a philosophy, specifically a philosophy of love. A relationship anarchist believes that love is abundant and infinite, that all forms of love are equal, that relationships can and should develop organically with no adherence to rules or expectations from outside sources, that two people in any kind of emotionally salient relationship should have the freedom to do whatever they naturally desire, both inside their relationship and outside of it with other people. Mary Posa explained that it is all about a continuous evaluation of a relationship in order to let it grow naturally wherever the people in it want it to go. It is also a valuing of all types of relationships without prioritizing romantic relationships. She said that relationships shouldn't be evaluated according to the script that we are given. Instead, we should think about the following points for each of our relationships. What do we want and need? What does the other person want and need? Where those needs overlap is where the relationship happens and where it should go. The philosophy can also be applied to communities. Where the needs of everyone in the community overlap is where the community is, and if it no longer serves everyone's needs, then what is the point? Ian Mack, in the same interview, expressed beautifully that what is needed for a properly functioning constellation or community is a shared vision, a shared understanding of what this is all for. That reminds me of what this church did a few years ago, when we all got together and brainstormed the purposes of this community, whether or not it was fulfilling its purposes, and how we would ensure that it did so. Of course, when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, it would be understandably difficult to use this principle all the time. Mary Posa suggested that in a friendship, relationship anarchy would mean that either person would be free to suggest exploring a romantic relationship if they wanted. However, who doesn't quake at the knees at the idea of telling your friend about your feelings? But in other areas of our lives, it would be an easy enough fix. Try asking yourself a question a day, perhaps. Would your life be improved if you swapped mint toothpaste for bubble gum? What if your next date consisted of buying bubble solution and blowing bubbles in a park? Is it possible to quit your office job and work as a traveling freelancer? I know I've tried to embody these principles this past year when I remember. Even small changes, like changing my name, have made a difference in my day-to-day life. And as I head into my second year of university, I will spend some time thinking about how I want to structure the next 5 years. I hope that everyone else will join me on whatever level they can and work towards a happier, more authentic, freer sort of world. I will leave you with this quote from Foucault. We must think that what exists is far from filling all possible spaces. So go out there, wonderful people, and invent some new stuff to fill the spaces of being.